Hi, Mike Brantley, auctioneer, here with you today, talking about a phrase I used, gosh, I bet a couple years ago, and continue to use. And the phrase is fraudulent inducement. And I'll part that out for you. Fraudulent, as in intentional misrepresentation that somebody relies on and is damaged as a result. And inducement, which is some sort of offer of consideration, something of value if you do something for me. Inducing someone to do something with some sort of valuable consideration. In this case, auctioneers committing fraudulent inducement. This is a all too common bid calling technique, and I use technique lightly here. It's mostly in with reserve auctions, and here's how it plays out. Seller brings a car into the auction, and that car's got to bring $10,000. He doesn't want to sell for any less than $10,000. Auctioneer takes a bidder at $2,000, then gestures over to the left, $2,500. Ringman, yeah, they got $2,500. You have to be $3,000. Now, what's the bidder who's being asked to bid $3,000 to assume? What's being portrayed here? That someone bid $2,500. Auctions are collaborative in nature. There's not, in the history of auctions, there's not been an auction event where people didn't look around the room, or more recently here, look online and see other bidders bidding and say, oh, I guess the item is worth more than I thought. Bidders use each other to gauge value, and auctioneers know that. But here's the crime in loosely speaking. I took this bidder at 2,000. It has to get to 10. I'm portraying that somebody bid 2,500. I go back to you at 3,000. Now, if it's a $10,000 car, you're going to bid $3,000. There's no real material harm here because you're willing to pay it anyway. But let's say we're at 9,000. 8,500 over here on the left, and you have to be 9,000. It has to bring 10, and you don't want to pay 9. But the auctioneer slash ringman has portrayed, has told you, has demonstrated, has held to your viewing that someone else thinks the car is worth 8,500. You don't know a lot about these cars. You don't know if this, you forgot to check which engine it had. Then if it's got the 3.2, it's good. If it's got the 3.7, it's not good. And well, he thinks it's worth 8,500, so I'm going to bid 9,000. Here's what's going on. There isn't anybody at 85. There's nobody over here who thinks this item is worth 8,500. I'll give you another example. I had an auctioneer tell me this, that when an item comes in to the auction, he's bid calling, he starts the bid and then takes the next bid and then portrays another bidder bidding, all under false pretenses. There's nobody bidding. Let me preface this. There's nobody bidding. I get 50 here, give me 75, now 100, now 125, and looking for 125. 50, 75, and 100. There were no bids at all, except the auctioneer faking, portraying, saying there were bids at 50 and 75 and 100. You want to be 125. Well, I tell you, I don't want to be 125. And in fact, if I knew what was going on, it would tell me nobody else thinks this is worth anywhere near 125 because there wasn't even a bidder at $50 or $75 nor $100. This auctioneer told me that, well, he has to set the increments. He has to tell people what increment he's using. Oh, really? I understand in a with reserve auction, you should understand, in a with reserve auction, the seller can bid himself or through an agent. That agent can be the auctioneer. The auctioneer can place bids for the seller. There are certainly auctions where other bidders know, yeah, that's a bid for the seller. But I think auctioneers have got on kind of a slippery slope here because they realized, well, if I say it's the seller, then they're not going to use that for comparative purposes because, you know, sellers think their stuff's great, right? Every seller thinks their stuff's valuable. So if the seller thinks this car's worth $8,500, well, sure, the seller thinks it's worth $8,500. Maybe it's not worth $8,500 at all. But if another bidder bids $8,500, you know, maybe it is worth $8,500. In fact, maybe it's worth $9,000. Well, I'm not going to tell you it's a seller. I'm going to tell you it's a legitimate bidder. I'm going to suggest to you there's a legitimate bidder over here at $8,500. Will you bid $9,000? I was interviewed by a Arizona, as I recall, I think it was Arizona, newspaper media, who said that this auction house, this auction platform, would register names on their platform that were non-existent. I mean, they weren't real people. They would register other names. I've seen this before. And those people would bid against the real bidders who had registered on this platform. And it was discovered. Some bidders found out that the same bidders were bidding and not winning or whatever, or there must have been some kind of dispute where the records were subpoenaed or viewed at least, and this was observed. And they, you can't make this stuff up. They interviewed the owner of the platform, or the auctioneer. I don't know if he's an auctioneer necessarily, but the auctioneer who was running this platform. And they said, you know, tell us about this. You putting other names in the platform that aren't real just to run the bid up. And he essentially says, well, yeah, I do that. Because if I, you know, people see other bidders bidding, they get excited and they think that's an indication of value. And if I put seller there, if I said the seller is bidding, well, that wouldn't excite them. Wouldn't excite them. Yeah, but that's fraud. I mean, that is the seller, but you're giving them some name that the other bidders will look at and say, okay, that's not the seller. A famous online platform, a well-known auction platform, in court finally admitted that Abigail was their seller bidding in California. And Abigail, there is no Abigail. I mean, Abigail is a fictitious name used in place of seller so that other bidders think that there is someone named Abigail who's bidding against them. And California passed a law shortly thereafter that said, hey, if you're bidding for the seller, we understand that you can bid for the seller, but you can't misrepresent the seller with the word Abigail or any other name. I mean, if it's, I think in California at the moment, I think if the seller is bidding in a with reserve auction, the seller has to be identified as the seller and not the seller's name, but seller. Well, nonetheless, the term fraudulent inducement, saying that I have a bid from a legitimate bidder in order to induce you to bid more, portraying values in the marketplace, holding in the market that these items, these lots, these properties are worth X in the marketplace when there is no market to suggest that. Because I've just said these numbers to make it appear so. And hopefully you'll bid accordingly. You walk into a car dealer. I talk about car dealers because they don't have the greatest reputation in the CNN, USA Today, Gallup annual honesty and ethical poll, they rank around 7%, as I recall, in terms of being honest and ethical. And so you walk in, you look at this car, and the used car salesman says, yeah, it's we've sold 3 just like it. In fact, we sold 1 not quite as nice as this, all for around $7,500. I think 2 were $7,500 and 1 was $7,400. And this one's priced $7,300 or $7,600. Is that a fair price? That seems to be a fair price. 3 other ones just like it, or maybe not as nice, sold for about the same price. Wouldn't the used car dealer want you to know that? Now, what if you buy that car for $7,300 and then find out that the used car salesman lied and the other 3 didn't sell for anything like that? Or they're worse, in the auctioneer's case, in our example here, there weren't any other 3 cars. They didn't. The cars didn't even exist. There weren't 3 previous sales. It's sure an interesting time in the auction business, that auctioneers portray bids in order to increase bids, portray genuine bids, knowing that other bidders will consider those serious, comparable data to use in their bidding. Taking advantage. That's what it is, taking advantage of bidders who think, when an auctioneer says, I've got $2,500 and I want you to bid $3,000, that they really do have $2,500. Mike Brantley, auctioneer. Pleasure to have you here today. Other videos on this page, other videos forthcoming. Have a great day and stay safe.